Ruth the virtuous woman. Ruth, a biblical character, was a woman who, being widowed, remains with her husband's mother. The story is told in the book of Ruth. Ruth's story is celebrated during the Jewish festival of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, 50 days after Passover. The story of Ruth and Naomi is one of the best-loved stories in the Bible. It tells of a relationship between two women, Naomi, the senior of the two, and her daughter-in-law Ruth. While the two women have several things in common, yet they are different in some respects. For example, both belong to the same sex, but from different culture and nature. Naomi was a Judean, while Ruth belonged to the Moabites tribe. Both lost their husbands, but while Naomi remained a widow, but Ruth took a second husband, Boaz. The book of Ruth in the Bible starts describing a famine in the land, which caused Elimelech to seek refuge in a foreign country, namely Moab, with his wife Naomi and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. As time passed, Elimelech died, and Naomi was left a widow. Her two sons took Moabites as wives. After a while they died. Their wives Orpah and Ruth became widows. Sometimes after the death of Naomi's two sons, whose lives became so difficult for Naomi and her two daughters-in-law in Moab, so she decided to return to Judah, where she would have a better chance of surviving. As she set off on the long journey home, her two daughters-in-law decided to go with her. The name Naomi means sweet, and it might be because of the sweetness of her character that Orpah and Ruth decided to go with her. Ruth's commitments to Naomi. On the road to Judah, Naomi told the two daughters-in-law to return to their mother and their own county. Orpah decided to return home, but Ruth did no such thing. Instead, she begged to continue with Naomi, her mother-in-law. Ruth did not even know if where she was heading with Naomi was better or worse than the place she was leaving. It seems all she could think of was not leaving Naomi to go through life alone. Her steadfastness can be seen and felt in the story when she said to Naomi that, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou lodgest, I will lodge, thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if I aught but death part thee and me." Ruth chapter 1 verse 16 to 17. Ruth's devotion to Naomi was unquestionable. It was not the mere company Naomi wanted on her long journey back home that made her refuse to scold the young lady and roughly order her to turn back. Rather, it was the genuineness that Naomi heard in Ruth's words and the younger woman's action towards her that made her allow Ruth to continue the journey with her straight to Judah. Ruth's action leaves no doubt in one's mind about her commitments to her mother-in-law. While in Bethlehem, Naomi and Ruth realized the need for sustenance, and the only way they could survive was to find work, and decided to work on the property of a well-off man known as Boaz, who was a wealthy relative of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. She intended to find grace and favor in his sight. The plan paid off dividends. When Boaz returned home, he glimpsed the young woman gleaning on his property and inquired of his workers who she was. He was told that Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi, to whom he had family ties. Boaz fell in love with Ruth and placed her in a privileged position on his property where she could eat at his table, rest in his quarters, and glean as much as she could carry back home. Eventually, Boaz could not resist this beautiful young woman who has graced her life with such pleasantries. Therefore, he went to the high court and asked her hand in marriage. He was successful in his bid and thus won the right to marry her. Lessons learned from the story of Ruth and Naomi. 1. God never forgets us. God will never forget his people, regardless of our situation. His loving kindness and faithfulness will always be towards us. Many times, after the death of Elimelech, while Naomi was living in Moab, she must have wondered if life would ever get any better. Yet God never forgets her, although far away from him and in foreign country. His commitments to Naomi stood strong, because he is a covenant-keeping God. As we glean from the story of Ruth and Naomi, we too must be assured that God is ever faithful to attend to our needs, even when it seems a daunting task for us to go through the overwhelming situations that seem to overcrowd our lives. we can be sure that He is faithful and will never leave or forsake us. He will lead us to greener pastures as we follow the prompting of the witness of His Holy Spirit that abides in us. 2. We must help others in need. As an elderly person, Naomi could not do much physical work. What's more, she was grief-stricken over the death of her husband, also shouldered to help and care for her aging mother-in-law. If Ruth wanted to, she could have left Naomi to fend for herself. However, she did not take that action, but remained with Naomi, and she was a companion and a helper throughout the remainder of the older woman's life. We can never be too busy getting on with our lives that we cannot reach out and help others in need. Love has no boundaries. If we help others go through difficult times, God will cause others to help us. It's in our own time of need. It is as well as we give that we received. 3. Live a life of expectancy. As Naomi and Ruth continued living in the city, Ruth decided to become the family's breadwinner. Therefore, she wants the farm of Boaz to glean. At this point, Ruth did not know that Boaz was a wealthy relative of Naomi. One could safely say that Ruth followed the leading of the Lord and ended up on Boaz's property. When Boaz returned to his farm and saw Ruth gleaning, he wanted to know whose daughter she was. Boaz took careful note of her and even wanted to know more about her. The situation we face is never so great that God cannot penetrate. He knows exactly what we are going through and will intervene on our behalf in time. Living in expectancy means we must expect God to come through for us any time, while we might be tempted to give up in life. God is using the problem to mold and refine us into the vessel that He wants us to become. Therefore, we should stop complaining and let the Master Potter have His way in our lives. As we submit to the process, we must live in expectancy, knowing that God will come through and meet our pressing needs, even when we least expect Him to. 4. We will be rewarded for our good work. As Boaz inquired from his workers about who Ruth was and learned she was Naomi's daughter-in-law and helper, this made him happy and he wanted to help her. Thus, Ruth was shown favor by him. We can only be rewarded for the good work we do, while others might not see us and what we do to others' welfare. God is still watching and seeing everything we do, and He will reward us in due time. Some of us may not receive our reward in this life, but in the afterlife. As we serve and help others, God is storing our rewards in heaven, and in due time we will reap those rewards when we go to our heavenly home. We can be sure that God will give us what is due, because He is a promise-keeping God who stands by His words that says in the book of Luke 6:23, "Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold your reward is great in heaven." The story of Ruth and Naomi reminds us of God's faithfulness. God never let down His people, even when things seem hopeless. We must always remember that we have a caring God who will put us back on the path of blessing, even when we stray that path. Thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more.